Last night in the house I bought, my husband waved divorce papers and sneered, "Sign or get out." His family laughed, thinking I'd beg, so I signed, left the keys, and vanished. His lawyer freaked out. "Do you even know what you just did?" I was standing in the middle of the living room of the Raleigh house I'd bought long before I ever met him, my fingertips still numb from the cold metal keys I just set on the kitchen table. He lounged against the doorway like this was some sitcom where he played the smug husband who always got the last word. Papers in one hand, cheap victory smirk carved across his face. "Sign or get out," he said again, slower this time, like I hadn't heard him the first. His voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling I'd paid to have renovated, bouncing back at me with this strange hollowness, like the house already knew he didn't belong in it. The divorce papers were thick, stiff, freshly printed. He'd highlighted the sections he thought would break me: spousal waiver of the property, relinquishment of equity, acknowledgement that the house, my house, belonged solely to him. He'd even added a note at the bottom in his own handwriting: "No contest allowed." He thought he'd cornered me. He thought this was checkmate. I didn't sit down. I didn't argue. Something in me had gone so quiet I could barely hear myself breathe. My hand didn't shake when I picked up the pen. I felt him watching every stroke like he expected me to snap or cry or beg. But I didn't. I signed every page. When I slid the stack back across the table, he grabbed it too fast, like victory might evaporate if he didn't clutch it right then. "Good girl," he muttered. That was the moment I knew something in him was rotted all the way through. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the house keys to the place I'd rebuilt from the stud's years before I even knew his name, and placed them gently on the table next to his little victory monument. He blinked. For half a second, I saw confusion break through his show of dominance, but he swallowed it and grinned wider. "Guess you finally know your place," he said, walking past me like he was giving a tour of his home. I didn't answer. I didn't scream. I didn't tell him about the late-night calls he thought I didn't know about. I didn't tell him what I'd found 3 days earlier in the glove compartment of his truck. I didn't tell him what was already in motion. I just walked out, closed the door behind me, felt the night air hit my face like a promise. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I was eating a stale croissant in the parking lot outside my job when my phone buzzed. His elite attorney, the one he bragged about like a trophy, was calling me. I didn't pick up. I let it go to voicemail. When it ended, another message came through, this time from him. A single line, "Call me." Now I didn't. But I couldn't stop thinking about why his lawyer would be calling me at 8 in the morning. Hours later, he finally sent a voice memo. His breathing was shaky, frantic. Behind him someone was yelling. Then I heard it clearly, the lawyer's voice slicing through the background. "Do you have any idea what you just let her do?" The message cut off. My hands went still, because his lawyer wasn't yelling at me. He was yelling at him. And I already knew, before the shock, before the unraveling, before the truth detonated, that whatever he thought he had taken from me, he hadn't even begun to understand what he'd given up. People assume moments like the one in that living room come out of nowhere, but they don't. They're just the final snap after years of quiet fractures. And ours started long before the first paper was waved in my face. I bought the Raleigh house when I was 28, right after my mother died. It was the first thing I ever owned outright. No cosigner, no spouse, no help. I worked double shifts at WakeMed, took every holiday no one else wanted, stacked overtime until my body shook from exhaustion. That house was the proof that I could make something stable out of a childhood that never offered any. Every cabinet, every tile, every inch of the place felt earned. Then I met him, Mark, 2 years later at a friend's backyard cookout in Cary. He had that charming, boyish kind of confidence that makes you believe he's incapable of hurting you. He laughed at my dry humor, asked too many questions about my job, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't realized I was starving for. The first red flag wasn't even about him, it was the way he reacted to the house. He told everyone he was so proud of me, but when it was just the two of us, he'd say things like, "It's crazy you got something like this all on your own," with a tone I couldn't name yet. Pride mixed with disbelief mixed with something territorial. I brushed it off, because I wanted to believe good things could happen without being tested. The second fracture came the night he proposed. He knelt in my living room, ring shaking in his hand, but after I said yes, he kept glancing around like he was measuring the space, his future space. That's when he suggested, lightly, casually, that maybe we should update the deed just for legal consistency. I laughed it off. He did too, but it planted a seed. The third, and the one I ignored because I didn't want it to be true, showed up a year into our marriage. We were at a dinner party with his coworkers, and one of them joked, "Man, Mark, you lucked out. Most people have to work their whole lives to afford a place like yours." Mark didn't correct him. He just smiled, lifted his glass, and said, "Yeah, timing is everything." Timing. That word sat in my stomach for days. After that, he started pushing more subtle boundaries, questioning repair decisions, insisting we should remodel his way, making comments about how since we were married, assets are basically shared anyway. Every time I hesitated, he'd twist it, say I was being controlling, or that he felt like I didn't trust him. And I wanted the marriage to work. I wanted to believe he loved me more than he loved the idea of owning something he never earned. But 3 days before he handed me those papers, I finally saw the truth without flinching. I'd been searching for our insurance documents in his truck because he'd misplaced them again. Instead, tucked in the glove compartment between old receipts and a broken phone charger, I found a manila envelope with the heading of his lawyer's firm. Inside were drafts, multiple drafts of the same papers he pretended were a spontaneous ultimatum, notes in the margins in his handwriting, a timeline, even a suggested date for when he should proceed with possession. Possession. Like I was a tenant, or an obstacle. I didn't confront him, I didn't say a word. Because the moment I saw that envelope, something inside me stopped breaking and started hardening. And that's why I signed. I wasn't giving up. I was letting him fall into a trap he had built with his own hands. The night after I found those drafts in his truck, something shifted so sharply inside me it felt physical, like a rib sliding back into place after being out of alignment for years. I didn't feel scared or desperate or humiliated anymore. I felt awake. Coldly, brutally awake. When I walked out of the house after signing, I didn't go to a friend's couch or some sad extended stay hotel like he probably imagined. I went to a small month-to-month rental in North Raleigh I'd already secured the night before. 1 bedroom, thin walls, musty hallway carpet. Nothing about it felt like home. But that was the point. I wasn't building a life there. I was building a strategy. The first thing I did was pull up every document connected to the house: purchase records, renovation invoices, tax filings, the mortgage satisfaction letter. Every single one had my name, and only my name, which I always knew. But seeing it laid out so neatly gave me a steadiness I hadn't felt in months. The second thing I did was call the lawyer my coworker had recommended months earlier when she suspected something was off with my marriage. I'd ignored the suggestion then. This time, I didn't hesitate. I met with him less than 24 hours later in a cramped office above a dental clinic, the whole room smelling faintly of fluoride and printer toner. He didn't smile. Didn't soften it. He read through the scanned pages I'd signed, skimmed the metadata, and nodded once. "He thinks he's outmaneuvered you," he said. "He's wrong, but you need to stay quiet, do nothing that tips him off." Quiet was easy. I'd been quiet for so long I could do it in my sleep. While Mark strutted through the house as if he'd conquered something, I worked double shifts and kept my head down. Every hour I wasn't at the hospital, I was researching. Property law, marital asset classification, duress clauses, fraudulent inducement, jurisdiction timing. I'd never studied law, but rage and clarity sharpened memory like nothing else. The more I learned, the more disturbing the picture became. The deeds, the renovations, even the premarital equity, he couldn't touch any of it. Not legally. Not ethically. Not without proving contributions he never made. And certainly not through papers he demanded I sign under threat of being thrown out. He didn't know that duress could void an entire agreement. He didn't know that every recorded improvement was traceable back to my bank account. He didn't know that the lawyer he'd hired was about to become my unwilling witness. But I didn't let myself get comfortable. Men like Mark don't stop when they think they've won. They get sloppy. Sloppy people make dangerous choices. The emotional cost hit me harder than I expected. Every night in that rental, when I took off my scrubs and sat on the edge of the sagging bed, I felt the loneliness like a bruise that kept deepening. There were moments I questioned whether revenge was worth dismantling the pieces of myself I'd barely held together. But then I'd remember the look on his face when he said, "Good girl," and the doubt evaporated. 2 weeks after I left, he posted a photo online, him standing in the kitchen of my house, beer in hand, captioned, "Finally mine." Friends commented congratulations, heart emojis, clapping hands. He responded to everyone. What he didn't know was that his own lawyer had already reached out to mine privately. Not to negotiate, not to mediate, but because the signature timestamps, the document versions, and the legal terminology Mark insisted on adding made the entire agreement not just voidable, but dangerous for him. And something even bigger was hiding under all of it. Something I hadn't uncovered yet. I found out what was hiding under everything on a Wednesday evening, the kind where the sky over Raleigh looks bruised and swollen before a storm. I was sitting in my car outside the rental, engine off, takeaway dinner cooling on the passenger seat, when my lawyer called. His voice was tighter than usual. "I need you to come in first thing tomorrow. We've discovered something." My stomach went cold. "About the papers?" "No," he said. "About the house." I didn't sleep that night. I lay on top of the stiff rental mattress, watching headlights crawl across the ceiling like slow-moving threats. I tried to steady my breathing, but my mind kept circling the same questions. What else could Mark have done? What else could he have stolen, forged, twisted? How deep did this go? By morning, I was at my lawyer's office before he even unlocked the door. He motioned for me to sit, but he didn't take the chair behind his desk. Instead, he leaned against the edge of it, arms folded, the way people do when they're about to deliver news you won't absorb the first time. "Your husband, or soon-to-be ex-husband, is not just trying to claim your house," he said. "He's been attempting to leverage your house." "Leverage it how?" He exhaled, slow and frustrated. "He used your property as collateral in a private loan agreement he signed 6 months ago." I stared at him. The words didn't land at first. They just hovered in the air, impossible. "What loan?" I finally asked. He handed me a printout. A scanned contract, a signature I recognized, and my address printed neatly at the top as the secured asset. My pulse hammered through my eardrums. "He can't do that. The house isn't his. It's not even marital property. He's not on the deed." "I know," my lawyer said calmly. "But the person he borrowed money from doesn't know that. And from the paperwork, it looks like Mark presented himself as the sole owner." I felt something deep in my chest crack open, not fear, not shock, but a dark, simmering fury that tasted almost metallic. "How much?" I asked. 80,000. $80,000, my lawyer continued. "The lender is a private individual, likely someone Mark didn't want the IRS or a bank looking at. Someone he thought he could charm or manipulate. But that person is now expecting repayment, and Mark is suddenly realizing he doesn't have the asset he promised them." That's when the pieces finally clicked, the drafts in the truck. His rush to get my signature. The timing, the pressure, the smugness. He wasn't trying to take the house because he wanted it. He was trying to take the house because he needed it. My lawyer watched my face carefully. This explains why his own attorney was furious. He didn't know, and now he's liable for filing knowingly fraudulent documents if he proceeds. They're panicking. A slow, shaking breath left my lungs. "Does Mark know you know?" "No," he said. "But he will soon. And when he realizes the agreement he forced you to sign is not only void, but evidence against him, he's going to get desperate." Desperate. The word sat between us like a loaded gun. I stood up. My legs felt strangely steady. Everything that had confused me, everything that had hurt me, everything that had made me question myself, it all rewrote itself in one instant. The story I'd been living wasn't about a selfish husband trying to claim a house. It was about a man drowning in debt, making promises he had no right to make, and trying to use me as the life raft. And now he was sinking. Fast. I left my lawyer's office with the kind of calm that feels like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Everything around you violent and tearing itself apart. But inside, a stillness so sharp it borders on lethal. Mark had leveraged my house, lied about ownership, signed a private loan contract using an asset that wasn't his, then rushed to force my signature after the fact to cover the fraud. It wasn't stupidity, it was survival. And the second he realized his plan was collapsing, he would claw at anything in reach, including me. That clarity didn't scare me. It focused me. That afternoon, I drove straight to the Wake County Recorder's office and filed a formal affidavit clarifying sole ownership and declaring the forced agreement void due to duress. My lawyer had drafted the wording. All I had to do was sign. The clerk didn't flinch. People file awful truths in that building every day. But when she slid the stamped copy back to me, the weight of it felt like armor. Next, we filed for a temporary protective financial restraining order. Nothing dramatic. Just a standard motion preventing either spouse from transferring, selling, or leveraging marital or non-marital assets during active divorce proceedings. Routine on paper, devastating for someone trying to hide debt. My lawyer said, this freezes his moves. When he breaks the order, and he will have grounds to bury him legally. But the legal route wasn't the revenge. What he feared more than court was exposure. That private lender was a name I didn't recognize, but it was someone he desperately didn't want involved. My lawyer had already begun identifying the individual, but he warned me not to contact them. Let this play out clean, he said. Don't put yourself in the line of fire. I nodded, and I meant it. Until that night. Back at the rental, I sat on the floor, eating cold takeout and staring at the screenshots of the loan contract. Mark had always been so careful with appearances. So polished. So obsessed with being perceived as successful, dependable, trustworthy. Every lie he had ever told me traced back to that hunger, to be admired, envied, respected. What would devastate him wasn't losing the house. It was losing the facade. I opened a blank document and began outlining everything he'd done. Dates, evidence, screenshots, the drafts I'd found in the truck, the timeline of his lawyer's involvement, a detailed breakdown of the fraudulent loan agreement, nothing embellished, nothing emotional, just facts, ugly, undeniable facts. It wasn't for social media. Not yet. It was preparation. Around midnight, my lawyer texted, "He knows, be careful tonight." My chest tightened, but not from fear, from anticipation. Because if Mark knew, he would reach out. And he did. At 12:43 a.m., my phone lit up with his name. I let it ring. Then another call. Then another. Then a string of messages that started with outrage, shifted to pleading, then spiraled into something darker. We need to talk. Don't make this worse. You don't understand what you're doing. Answer me. Now. The shift told me everything. He was unraveling. I silenced the phone and kept working on my outline. By the time the sun rose, I had a plan built on 3 pillars. Legal pressure to trap him. Documented evidence to destroy him. Patience. Enough patience for him to walk himself into the final blow. But revenge has a way of revealing the rot you still haven't seen. Because that afternoon, before I could execute step 1, my lawyer called again, voice low, urgent. Something new came in, he said. You need to hear this in person. My stomach dropped. Is it about the loan? I asked. No, he said quietly. It's worse, much worse. I got to my lawyer's office so fast I don't remember the drive. My hands were still shaking when I walked in, but he didn't waste time with small talk or warm-up explanations. He slid a folder across the table, thin but heavy in a way paper shouldn't be. Read the top page, he said. It wasn't a legal document, it was an email, from Mark's private lender, sent to Mark. Subject line. Final warning before action. The message was short, 3 sentences, written in clipped, almost cold language. But one line punched through my brain like a blade. If you cannot deliver the asset as promised, the secondary arrangement will be enforced. My mouth went dry. What secondary arrangement? My lawyer took a breath, steadying himself. We believe Mark entered into a second contract with this person, something unofficial, something off the record. What kind of arrangement? He hesitated, not dramatically but carefully. Like he was weighing what I could handle. Labor, he said, or favors, something personal, something he didn't want documented. I frowned. Mark doesn't have any skills worth. My lawyer shook his head. Not labor like that. The lender appears to be a woman he knew before you met him. The floor tilted under me. He continued, voice low. We pulled metadata from the loan file. The originating IP address matches a property in Wake Forest owned by a, let's say, a business entrepreneur with a history of collecting debts in non-traditional ways. Non-traditional, I repeated. Just say it. She pressures people, intimidates them, uses leverage that isn't financial. My pulse roared in my ears. You're saying Mark had some kind of relationship with her? A relationship, yes, he said. But not the kind you're thinking. This wasn't an affair. I blinked. My mind scrambled to understand. He pushed the folder closer. Read the second page. It was a screenshot of a text exchange, not between Mark and the lender. Between Mark and someone saved in his phone as SR, the messages were short, transactional, and chilling. SR, did you tell her yet? Mark, no, she won't react well. SR, you don't have a choice anymore. Deliver the house or deliver her. Mark, I'm working on it. Give me time. SR, time's up. My stomach twisted so hard I thought I might throw up. Deliver me, I whispered. My lawyer nodded grimly. We believe Mark promised this lender access to you. I stared at him, unable to speak. He continued gently, not physically, not romantically, but she appears to be involved in a network where personal data, medical credentials, and insider access are traded. You're a nurse. You work at a major hospital. People like her pay a lot for information. Information. Not a house. Not money, me, my career, my access, my vulnerability. The realization hit like a second betrayal layered under the first. Mark wasn't just trying to steal my house. He had been preparing to use me as currency. A cold wave spread through my body, slow and paralyzing, until it reached my fingertips. My lawyer's voice softened. He wasn't planning to harm you physically, but he was planning to hand over enough access to jeopardize your license, your job, and your entire future. That's what the secondary arrangement means. I felt myself breathe, but the breath didn't feel like it belonged to me. Mark hadn't just been drowning, he'd been dragging me down with him. Worse, he'd tied a weight to my ankles and called it marriage. I closed the folder. And in that moment, something inside me, whatever fragile piece still believed he had once loved me, died entirely. I want to finish this, I said quietly. All of it, my lawyer nodded. Then prepare yourself. He's going to come at you harder now. Desperation makes people reckless. But he didn't know the part that had already settled into my bones. I was done defending myself. From here on, I was the one who would strike. I didn't have to wait long for Mark to lash out. Desperate men don't strategize, they thrash. And thrashing people always reveal the thing they've been hiding the most. He showed up at the rental 2 nights later. I heard the knock, violent, impatient, long before I reached the door. When I opened it, he stood there with rain dripping off his hair, his face twisted into something that wasn't anger so much as fear wearing anger's mask. We need to talk, he said, pushing past me before I could stop him. I didn't raise my voice. You shouldn't be here. Don't start, he snapped. He paced the tiny living room like a trapped animal. I know what you've been doing. The filings, the affidavit, the restraining order, you're trying to sabotage everything. Everything, I said quietly. Or the plan you hid from me. His jaw locked. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it. The moment he realized I knew. Not just pieces, not rumors, not guesses, all of it. He sank onto the edge of the rental couch, hands buried in his soaked hair. You don't understand what kind of person she is. That woman you owe money to, I asked. Or the one you promised my access to. His shoulders jerked. For a heartbeat, he didn't breathe. Then he exhaled a laugh, dry, despairing, almost unhinged. It wasn't supposed to touch you. None of this was supposed to touch you. Then explain, I said. Tell me the real reason. He lifted his head. And for the first time since the day I met him, there was no charm, no ego, no practiced expression. Just a man pinned under the weight of his own dishonesty. I grew up watching my father bow to people with power, he said. Men who owned our debt. Men he had to answer to because he didn't know how to say no. I told myself I would never be that weak. His voice broke, not with emotion, but with humiliation. I wanted a life that looked like something. A house, respect, stability. I wanted to be the man people envied instead of pitied. My chest tightened, but not with sympathy. He continued, words tumbling out, each one darker than the last. When I married you, it felt like I finally had it. You were responsible, successful, people admired you. Being next to you made me look like someone I wasn't, but that wasn't enough. I needed something of my own. Something big enough to change how people saw me. So you used my house, I said. No, he met my eyes. I used you, because you were the only thing in my life anyone valued. A sick, slow heat crawled up my throat. He wasn't finished. When I met SR, she told me she could help me get ahead. Real money, real opportunities, she just needed information. He swallowed hard. Information I didn't have. But you did. My hospital access, he nodded. She said once I delivered, she'd clear the loan, and she'd make sure we were both protected. She promised it would never get back to you. She said you'd never have to know. I stared at him. So you gambled my career, my home, my safety, And when you couldn't deliver my access, you tried to deliver the house instead. His silence was confirmation. You were going to hand me over, I said, not physically, not violently, but completely. Why? And that's when he gave me the reason, the real one, the reason that landed like a punch to the sternum. Because she told me that women like you never stay, he whispered. And I needed something you couldn't walk away with. The words were so brutally honest, so stripped of pretense, that they felt like the ugliest truth he'd ever spoken. He wanted ownership because he believed he could never deserve loyalty. He didn't betray me to hurt me. He betrayed me because he believed it was the only way to keep me. And when he said it, he looked relieved, like finally confessing made the horror logical, like the damage made sense. I stood there, feeling my pulse in my teeth. That, I said, is the most disturbing thing you've ever told me. He reached toward me, voice shaking. I just need time to fix it. If you would stop fighting me, I could still make this right. No, Mark, I said. You've already made your choice. He froze, because he heard it, the finality in my voice, the quiet before the last strike. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I didn't tell him how sickening it was to hear that he'd tried to turn my life into currency just to feel powerful for once. I just stepped back, pointed to the door and said, "Leave." He didn't. Not right away. Mark wasn't used to having no leverage. But when I repeated myself, quiet, firm, done, he finally stood. He walked out of that rental slowly, like each step exposed how thoroughly the ground beneath him had rotted. The door closed behind him with a soft click. That was the last sound he controlled in my life. The next morning at 7:12 a.m., my lawyer filed the full packet. The affidavit, the protective order, the evidence of fraudulent inducement, and most importantly, the motion to notify the private lender of Mark's misrepresentation. That final move wasn't about helping her. It was about documenting, formally and permanently, that Mark had attempted to collateralize an asset he did not own. It transformed everything he'd done into a legal landslide. My lawyer said, once this is served, he'll panic. I said, good, because panic makes people predictable. By noon, Mark violated the restraining order twice. First, he tried to access our joint account to move money. Then he attempted to contact my hospital, posing as my spouse, seeking clarification about my login permissions. He didn't get past the front desk, but the attempts were logged. By 3 p.m., my lawyer called. It's time. We sent the full evidence packet to Mark's attorney, and that was the moment everything detonated. At 4:27 p.m., I got a single text from his lawyer, a man who had previously spoken to me with the smug tone of someone accustomed to winning before the game even began. The message was short. I strongly advise you avoid any contact with Mark. He has not been truthful with us. We will be withdrawing representation. That was the first collapse. The second came an hour later when SR herself tried to call me from a blocked number. I didn't answer, but her voicemail told me everything I needed to know. Her voice was smooth, controlled, but furious underneath. Your husband made promises he couldn't keep. This situation is between us. Stay out of it. I saved the message, forwarded it to my lawyer. His reply was immediate. Perfect. Direct evidence of her involvement. Do not respond. While those two burned bridges, the third collapse happened quietly, invisibly, Mark's last illusion of power evaporating as the court processed the filings. Every fraudulent step he took became part of a public record he could never outrun. And then, the final strike. The sheriff served him the documents the next morning, at my house, on my porch, in full view of the neighbors he'd tried so hard to impress. He called me seconds after. I let it ring. He left a voicemail, voice cracking, begging me to talk, not apologizing, not taking responsibility, just begging, because the last thing he had left to lose was the image of himself. Later that afternoon, my lawyer forwarded me the official notice. The forced agreement was void. The house remained solely mine. Mark faced potential civil penalties for misrepresentation and investigation for attempting to exploit medical access through a third party. He had dug the hole, I had handed him the shovel. He buried himself. When I finally returned to my house, the air smelled different. Not new, not clean, just honest. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls I had once doubted I'd ever see again. The place felt steadier than I did. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where he'd smirked and said, "Sign or get out." I ran my hand over the surface, remembering exactly where I'd placed the keys the night I walked away. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. And freedom, I learned, is quieter than revenge, but it lasts a hell of a lot longer. Before I went upstairs, I whispered the final thing I'll ever say to him, even though he wasn't there to hear it. You didn't lose the house. You lost the last version of me who ever feared you. That was the real ending, the true revenge.